Hello, McFleet, and welcome back to another episode of McFly's Movie House. I'm your host, Marta McFly, and we have honestly just a tender episode today that I'm so pleased to tackle with you all. I'm a huge fan of the legendary late great Japanese filmmaker Yasujiro Ozu, and I love watching and revisiting his movies because they always feel so welcoming and gentle. Just these reminders to be better and to do better, all while giving this air of slight melancholy, let's call it. So, with this appreciation I have for his work, I really started to wonder what sort of episode I wanted to do on him, at least for the first time to chat about his filmography because it's so vast. So, where does one start, right? And then I decided the easiest place would probably be to chat about Tokyo Story, which is the movie that he's most well known for. And from there, maybe I got a bit too greedy, who knows, but I wanted to do more than that. So, Tokyo Story is actually the third entry in a loose trilogy of his called the Noriko Trilogy. And I think it's just a great place to start for folks that haven't checked out his work before and are wanting to dive in. So, with the Noriko trilogy, it consists of Late Spring from 1949, Early Summer from 1951, and then Tokyo Story, as I said, from 1953. And Ozu gives us these familial dramas, all of which were, of course, filmed during the post war period of his career. And we'll obviously get into that later on and what that means. But now, when I say that that's a loose trilogy, I mean, you don't have to watch them all in order. They're all separate stories. But the thing that ties them together, besides the themes that we'll discuss, are that they feature a character named Noriko, and they're all played by Setsuko Hara. So, before we get into all of that, I'm going to introduce my guest for the day, who also happens to be a Ozu fanatic. He is a film school graduate and also a fellow movie content creator that curates his page based on classic and international cinema with a specific love on Japanese cinema and also Tarkovsky. So it makes sense why we're friends now, right? So, with all that said, I'm welcoming Sinjun Chapman to the podcast. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, I couldn't think of anybody better to have on for this episode. I mean, I feel like you've maybe even seen more Ozu movies than me, right?
I think I've seen six or seven of them, so
Yeah. Maybe. Oh, then maybe we're on the
around the
same
same.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I regardless, I'm so thrilled to chat to you about him today. I can't wait to hear about your insight. But before we get into that, I always ask my guests, what have you watched recently and what do you suggest listeners check out?
So it's interesting to start off a Yasujiro Ozu episode by bringing up Michael Haneke, but I
Oh,
did watch Funny Games recently, and I
nice.
really, really loved it. I had it at 4 stars right after I watched it, and then I literally thought about it every day for like the next week, and I'm like, nah, that's 4.5. That movie's amazing.
Yay. Wait, was it the original or was it the one that he
Yeah,
did? Because he did two, right?
yeah. What person makes that movie twice? But
I know.
yeah, I saw the original.
Amazing. Anything else?
And then I also watched Brokeback Mountain for the first time. That was one that,
That's a good
like,
one.
how have I not seen it already?
Hmm.
And I expected it to be like a slow burn romance, and I heard it was sad. I didn't know it was like obliterate my soul sad.
It is.
So I had the wrong expectations going in, but it was
Oh no.
fantastic.
Hmm. Yeah, cool. Well, I mean, those are two great picks. I mean, I would assume many people have seen Brokeback Mountain,
Yeah.
definitely. But yeah, Funny Games is incredible. I love Funny Games. I actually had on, who did I have on recently that brought up Funny Games? I think it was the Raiders boys. That was
Mm.
part of our discussion too. But anyway, Noriko Trilogy, Yasujiro Ozu. I'm curious what your relationship is with discovering his filmography. Did you start with the Noriko Trilogy? Because for me, I think I started with either Tokyo Story or Good Morning, which is unrelated to the trilogy,
Mm.
of course.
So I first heard about Ozu in film school as in a global
Mm.
cinema class. We were talking about Japan that week, and we didn't watch one of his movies that week. We watched a Kurosawa movie instead, but we talked about him and we watched clips from Tokyo Story. And it was when I was like 18 or 19, and I'm like, that looks boring. Not gonna watch that. Um, but now I'm a little older. I'm a little more
Mhm.
mature, and I watched all the Letterbox 250 movies. I got to Tokyo Story, and I'm like, oh, that guy looks boring. And then I watched it, and I was like, I was so wrong. Oh my gosh, this is incredible. I need to watch all of his movies now. That was so beautiful. So I started with Tokyo Story, and then I watched the rest of the Noriko trilogy, and then I watched Good Morning, and the rest is history.
Amazing. I love that. So let's do a quick breakdown of what we're doing today. It's pretty similar to the other episodes where we highlight multiple films by a filmmaker. We'll start by giving a general background overview into Ozu's career, along with, stylistic elements that he's known for. Then we'll get into each three of the movies. Obviously, feel free to jump in at any point. How does that sound?
Yeah, that works.
Beautiful. So, Yasujiro Ozu, as we said, Japanese filmmaker. He was born in 1903 and passed away too soon in 1963. And Ozu basically grew up watching movies. He was a film fanatic from a young age, watching movies from all over the world. And initially, his uncle helped him get a job in 1923 at Shochiku Film Studios. And he worked with Shochiku his entire life. He started as an assistant in the cinematography department. And 3 years later, he became the third assistant director. The following year, in where are we? 1927, there we go. He was promoted again, this time as a director for period piece films called Jiraigeki films. His first film was Sword of Penitence, I believe, and that one's now sadly lost. But the reason why I mention it is because he worked on the screenplay with Kogo Noda, who had become a very important figure in his career. He basically became his co-writer throughout his entire career, not for every film, but for a lot of them. I believe he wrote or co-wrote 27 films for Ozu. So, I won't break down all of his movies, but in 1932, his comedy, I Was Born But, that's when he started gaining international acclaim. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't seen much of his earlier work. I've seen most of his later work.
I haven't seen that one either. I know it's on the Criterion channel. It's a silent film. So
Mhm.
maybe we could both watch that and let each other know what we think. But so he turned to more serious themes in the 1930s. And a lot of the prominent themes in his work revolve around family, as I mentioned at the start, about marriage and about the differences between generations. And he made a total of 54 films, which spanned 35 years from the 1920s to the 1960s. And they're a great way to look at Japanese history in itself, since they encompass so many changes in Japan from, pre-war to the war period to post-war. And his characters are usually middle class, often incorporated conflicts between men and women, also the younger generation and the older generation, as we mentioned, which we see a lot in the Noriko trilogy. Is there anything else you want to add? Am I missing something?
No, you did a really great job going through that.
Oh,
I
thank
like
you.
that you pointed out you could see like Japanese history through his movies, even
Mhm.
though they're not documentaries. You can still see through, specifically with the Noriko trilogy, being in the post-war period. That's so important
Yes.
to the culture of those films. So I think that's really
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Especially because if you look at Tokyo Story, that's the first one that was made after the occupation, right? The American
I,
occupation.
yeah.
Yeah. So there is that difference. So with the post-war period, which includes obviously the Noriko trilogy, as you said, that's when he started gaining that international acclaim, like proper international acclaim. And Late Spring, actually, I think you could qualify as the start of his movies of this period. It's also during this time, he also solidified his storytelling style and cinematography that we all know him so well for, wouldn't you say? Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I would say this is actually a great segue into his style now. So let's
Hmm.
get into it. So before we jump into that, I do want to bring up the Japanese literary term that encompasses his filmmaking so well. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Yeah, mono no aware, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's an important part of Japanese art, Ozu's work too. And from what I understand, maybe you have a different definition, but it's translated as the transience of things or the sadness of life, right?
Yeah, yeah. I kind of applying it to Ozu's filmmaking because it can, be a pretty broad term. I kind of see it the way finding meaning in like smaller things and in just like everything in your life. And I think you see an appreciation for that in his films.
I love that. I actually like your definition more. It's concise and just very on the nose of his work. So let's go with that one. But so with that, Ozu has just such an ability to find beauty in the ordinary or even hardships and just make all of this so profound. And there's a wonderful documentary on the Criterion channel from 1993, Talking with Ozu. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh, you would love it. It's just directors sharing what they love about him so much. And like well-known directors too. There's Claire Denis, there's Aki Kaurismäki.
Oh
I
wow.
can't think who else, but there's actually a quote by Kaurismäki that stuck out to me. He said, quote, "What I respect most is that Ozu never needed to use murder or violence to tell everything that's essential about human life." Isn't that so true?
Wow. That that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true, and that's Ozu's style. His compositions were always meticulously precise, almost to the point of looking like paintings. He used a lot of static shots, and I would even say as his career went on, he moved the camera less and less the older he got.
Yeah.
And he's also known for his low camera angles, the 55 millimeter lens, which will explain why. And his dialogue scenes were unique visually speaking.
Yeah.
Is there anything else visually you want to add that's like very much so him?
His most obvious stylistic is that low camera. It's very low, and it kind of, I like it because it models the architecture of the houses. It's almost like the
Hmm.
frames and then the sliding doors and
Hmm.
sitting on the floor with like the low table. It all like works in tandem together.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like you said, a lot of static shots, and then his dialogue scenes, he has it center framed, but not like in a Wes Anderson way. It's
Yeah.
like I they're centered framed, but it's not full symmetrical. They're normally like looking at an angle, but still in the center. I think
Mhm.
that's very Ozu to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that difference between shooting a conversation. What directors will usually do is they'll go for over the shoulder shots, right? And he
Hmm.
would get the camera to look at them directly, kind of like Wes Anderson, like you said, but not.
Yeah,
Totally. And then we have that 50 millimeter lens. And I didn't really understand initially why specifically the 50 millimeter lens, but from what I was discovering was that's actually the closest lens to the human eye.
yeah,
So that's why he would use that. And it really does look like you're in the room with these people having a conversation.
yeah.
As you said, the low angle, he invented what's called the tatami mat shot, right?
Hmm.
Which means placing the camera so low at the level that someone would be kneeling on a tatami mat, much how his characters do. Have you noticed that even when his characters stand, it's still shot usually from the tatami mat level?
Yeah, yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. I love the low angle that he does because it kind of puts everyone on the same level playing field. It's not
Yes.
giving heightened importance to somebody necessarily. It's treating each character with respect.
Wow, I actually love that. I never looked at it in those sort of terms, but that you're absolutely right. Yeah, level playing field. I really
Hmm.
like that. That's beautiful. So, narratively speaking, even though one could call his stories simple, he made sure that everything just looked perfect and he transported viewers into his stories as much as possible. Like we said, with those visuals, he was so meticulous and
Hmm.
every object, every person, everything is placed where it is for a reason. And I think that that's why he didn't move his camera much either, because once you move your camera you change the composition of an image, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So his characters always felt like they were stuck in certain scenes visually, like he'd
Hmm.
confine them in frames or frames within frames, as you were saying as well. There'd always be like sliding doors or
Hmm.
quite literally frames and
Yeah.
so on. Have you read Paul Schrader's book, Transcendental Style in Film?
No, but I keep getting that one recommended to me, so I think I need to get on that.
I need to read it in full as well, but there's a beautiful passage in there that's just stunning. He writes, like the traditional Zen artist, Ozu directs silences and voids.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
I think that really speaks to his visual style too. And ultimately, what Ozu wanted to do was show us day to day life, the struggles that we face, the ways in which we all inevitably move on, And it's interesting to me that he's known, or he was known, as the most Japanese director,
Mm.
because I find that his themes and problems that the characters face are so universal. And I was reading that initially the Japanese film industry was hesitant to show his films to the West because
Hmm.
they feared that they wouldn't be understood and that they're too Japanese. And yet, I mean, you look at something like the Noriko trilogy, I would struggle to find a person that would be unable to resonate with it in one way or another. I mean, what do you think?
I was thinking the exact same thing because something that's so incredible about Ozu's films are they are very Japanese. They're very linked to the culture and the time period that they're set in, but they also somehow simultaneously have these universal themes that everybody can click with. So even if you don't fully understand the cultural context of post-war Japan, you can still find so much like these universal themes. And I think that's why his films are so timeless, because even the younger generation in these movies is now the older generation now. So it's like a completely different context when you're for now, but we still see these universal themes about family and generations and familial bonds and everything. And that's why his films are so timeless and they'll
Hmm.
continue on.
Oh, I love that. It's, yeah, exactly. Timeless is the perfect way to put it, I would say. But so before we get into the Noriko trilogy specifically, I want to point out some key players in his work. So, addition to Kogo Noda, as we said, he also had his cinematographer Yuharu Atsuta, and then actors. We mentioned Setsuko Hara, obviously, who plays
Mm-hmm.
all three Norikos. Then we had Haruko Sugimara. She's usually there playing, I don't even know. They all interchangeably have different roles. It'd be stupid
Mm-hmm.
for me to say she plays this person because they play so many different people. So there's those four I think I just mentioned, and then most notably we have Shishuryu, who
Yes.
was literally in 52 out of 54 movies by Ozu. It's crazy. And I think there was one quote I read where he said, "I cannot think of my own identity without thinking of Ozu."
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, he's great. It's funny to me when I first watched the Noriko trilogy, I kind of had to do a double take because in one of them he's playing a brother, and then in the next one he's playing a dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, a- and he looks older too,
Yeah, he
which
does.
confused me. I don't know if that was like makeup or because it was only 3 years apart. I'm like, there's no way this guy has aged this much in 3 years.
I was thinking that too when I rewatched Tokyo Story this week. I'm like, he looks so much older in this. So it might have been makeup or costuming or something about it.
For sure. Is there anybody else you want to add, or for in terms of key players? I
I know
can't
we
think of
mentioned
anyone else.
Tetsuko Hara.
Yeah.
She plays Noriko and all
Hmm.
those. And I was reading a little bit about her. And in the Noriko trilogy, she's always pressured to like get married. That's like one of the
Hmm.
big plot points in all of these is that her character needs to get married. And I found it really interesting that the actress in real life, never got married, even though that's like the role she's so well known for. And
Hmm.
she actually retired from acting in 1963, the same year that Ozu died. And she went into like a secluded life towards the end of her life and wasn't very much in the public eye. Satoshi Kon's movie Millennium Actress is actually not based off her life, but inspired by her. Did you not
Oh
know
my
that?
gosh, no. And I love that
I
movie.
know. I didn't know when I watched it, but I was reading up
What?
about yeah, because she after Ozu died, she went into more like secluded life,
Yeah.
and just like the actress and Millennium Actress, and but it's recounting her like the iconic
Yeah.
roles. It's like Setsuko Hara.
Wow. I
Yeah,
had no idea. You just blew my mind
I
with
know that
that.
was my reaction when I found out too.
Oh my gosh, that makes it even more precious to me. I'm gonna try rewatching that this week then with that
Yeah.
in my mind. That's incredible. Wow. Okay, I'm so glad you've told me that. I love that. Perfect. Well, then I guess that we can start on the Noriko trilogy then.
Yeah.
Great segue. I think it's important to also mention that Ozu really loved to shine a light on the role of women in Japanese
Hmm.
society. And these post-war films really show them gravitating towards the traditional and becoming more liberated. And a great example of these independent characters are all three of the Noricos, right?
Hmm.
They have these fair and noble moral compasses, I would say. And in late spring, I mean, as you were saying, it's always about the pressure of her to marry. So in late spring, she doesn't want to marry because she doesn't want to leave her dad alone.
Hmm.
In early summer, she marries to appease her family and the obligation that she carries to them. And in Tokyo Story, she remains alone because of her sense of duty to her late husband.
Hmm.
So again, just these noble sort of motifs and personality traits. And what's so interesting is that in all three stories, she has the freedom to make her own decision
Yeah.
instead of what's being chosen by her family. And I would say personally that freedom is the most important thing, even if the outcome isn't always the most cheerful. So do you agree, disagree?
No, yeah, for sure. I think it's really interesting how he portrays the role of women in the post-war period, because the war for so many countries really changed kind of what the role of women would be, since all the men were out at war, the women had to take over the workforce. And now that the
Hmm.
war's over, men coming back home, and it kind of upsets this traditional balance
Yes.
of what a woman's role is. And I think in his post-war films like Noriko Trilogy, that's very prevalent. It has these like traditional expectations of getting married. She's like 27, and they're like, "How are you
Yeah.
not married yet?" But she still has that freedom, even though there's societal pressure. She has that freedom to make these choices that she wants, whether good or bad, what other people want. She has that choice.
Exactly. And I'm happy that you brought up the war because that's exactly what I was going to bring up next is just how different these generations are and how they deal with the change that has come during this time, like you said, including not even just the war, but the American occupation of
Hmm.
Japan, which lasted
Yeah.
from 1945 to 1952, I believe. Yeah, right before Tokyo Story came out.
Hmm.
So just steering further out of this traditional way of living, and so we watch this older generation absorb these changes of a modern Japan and kind of realize how rigid they are in their ways. While this younger generation, and particularly, as you were saying, female characters such as Noriko, they try to live within the present every day and
Hmm.
embrace the change. And interestingly enough, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that while Ozu shows these memories of the past in a, let's say, delicate or romanticized way, I don't think that he ever makes a statement that this should come back and this should replace the modern way of living. What do you think?
I completely agree. He doesn't give this like specific standing on it. He really
Hmm.
just like presents these conflicting generations, and he doesn't say like one is right and one is wrong, or we need to go back to this, and I think that is part of why it's so timeless, is that we can these universal themes are applied throughout these generations, and he's not saying one is correct. I think it would be easy with like a movie about generational differences to have a very condescending tone and
Yes.
saying about, oh, these the dumb younger generation needs to learn from the older wiser older generation. It could easily have a condescending tone like that, but it doesn't. It still shows the older generation trying to instill their wisdom, but it's not explicitly saying like this is better and we need to go back to what the older generation thinks.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to hark back to the claim that his younger female characters represented this, let's call it modern Japan, Ozu uses food a lot as well. And we see instances of that in late spring and early summer. Do you know where I'm going with this?
I think,
Kind
but
of. There's a reason. There's a reason. So pay attention to how women always bring food to serve at the table. And
mhm.
whenever men do, it's met with this like general disorder or hiccups, let's call them. Like in late spring, Noriko's father brings bread and tea for Noriko and her friend, but he forgets the sugar in the spoon and he's kind of like, oops, and sheepishly smiles, right? And then you have early summer when the father brings home that wrapped loaf of bread and his son thinks it's a train set for himself and he like throws it in rage when he sees that it's bread. So
Hmm.
where am I going with this? So I would say that men represent this traditional way of thinking while women represent the modern, and they use this food as and drink, food and drink, as a time to gather in solidarity.
Mm.
So one example of that is again in early summer where Noriko has dinner with her brother and sister-in-law and she's making fun of her brother.
Yeah.
And while he says what you brought up a few minutes ago, that post-war women have a different attitude about them. And Noriko tells him that all they want is equality. And her brother then says something like, well, that's why you're not married. And she says, no, 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 I can get married whenever I want to. I just don't want to. Am I making sense with this whole food and
Yes.
modern versus old?
Yes. Hmm.
Okay, good. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I completely agree. I didn't think about you make a really good point about when the men bring the food. It's this, it's weird. It's like this hiccup, like you said. And then, he forgot to bring, part the sugar or whatever. It's like he hasn't been practicing his whole
Hmm.
life to bring food, So this is like a big change. He's like, oh, I have to bring food, and he's not used to remembering everything.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, dude, you had one job.
Yeah, bring
But
sugar with tea.
exactly. How do you mess this up? But so this brings us to, I guess, the first in the trilogy, which is Late Spring, 1949. As we mentioned, many critics see this as the first post-war period film for Ozu. And it features, again, as we said, these serene images of an old traditional Japan. The story focuses on a middle-class family. We meet Noriko. She's cheerful, upbeat. I mean, as she is in all three movies. And she lives with her widowed professor father, who is a bit all over the place. He's played, of course, by Shishiryu. And then we have Noriko's aunt, played by Haruko Sugimura, who we also mentioned earlier. And the aunt is a bit of a troublemaker. And she puts it, to say the least, she puts it in Noriko's father's mind that considering Noriko's 27, as you said, she should be getting married soon. And Noriko is just happy with her life. She's happy taking care of the house, her dad. She doesn't want that to change. And so, to convince her, he starts planting a seed that he's going to remarry. So, if he's changing his life, she should change hers too. And so the film really does look at, as we both said, these changing roles of women in post war Japan, while also touching on the themes of familial duty and sacrifice. Anything you want to add in terms of themes or anything at all?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting how different he portrays the generations in this one, because it feels like Noriko is the in this one is the one that is holding on to the past. She doesn't want her life to change. She's happy with where it is. And then the father wants to her to change. He wants to have something new. And you normally expect the younger generations to embrace change and the older
Mm-hmm.
ones to hold on to traditionalism more. And you can make the
Mm-hmm.
argument that he is holding on to traditionalism by the expectation to get married. But I also see from Noriko's perspective, she likes the stability of her life right now, and getting married would completely change everything. So she's
Mm-hmm.
like resistant to that change. And I feel like in some of the other films, it's more the older generation is the one resistant to change, which I thought was
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually really happy that you brought that up because I didn't even think of that. The inverse of older generation wanting change in this case versus Noriko sticking to the traditional. That's really interesting. And it's interesting how they really push Noriko into this without even asking her what she really wants. Like
It's crazy.
it's crazy. She's over here telling them point blank, like, I just want to keep my life as it is. And I don't know about you, her aunt really annoyed me.
Oh yeah.
Like, she even took it upon herself to find Noriko a potential husband. I mean,
Yeah.
how are you feeling watching this woman?
As, I it makes me laugh, honestly, just kind of how ridiculous it is. Norco's just like, yeah, I'm happy with my life, and everyone else is like, no, here's a man. What?
Yeah. And she was the worst. The aunt was, I feel like, the catalyst for everything.
Yeah,
Just
for
awful.
sure.
Yeah. So, along with the film looking at, obviously, as we said, the changing roles of women and family dynamics in Japan, at the time. I also think it's worthwhile noting that because this movie was released while Japan was under American occupation, that meant that they had to deal with American censors. And
Mm-hmm.
these censors did not want to glorify life in Japan from the pre war period. They
Mm.
wanted it to include Western themes. And Ozu does a lot of this in Early Spring. Sometimes, obviously, there's that famous example that I'm thinking of. Do you know which one I mean?
Um, I'm not sure.
The bike ride. When Noriko is going on a bike ride with her father's assistant, we see that massive Coca-Cola sign.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
now I know what you're talking
and
about.
exactly. And so we see the massive Coca-Cola sign, and then throughout that montage, let's call it, we
Hmm.
also see other signs, and they're all in English.
Yeah.
And we also had what else? There were moments where they talk about Western influence, like baseball, which
Yeah.
I think is even seen, is it not? Or is
I
it
think
just
so.
mentioned?
I
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. And then there's also when Noriko's aunt tries to tell her that one of the potential suitors looks like Gary Cooper. Do you remember
Yes.
that?
Yeah, I picked up on that too. I thought it
Japanese
was
Gary
interesting to
Cooper.
name a Hollywood star instead of like a Japanese star. I didn't
Yeah.
consider that it was during the occupation. That's interesting.
So I would say that those are more obvious examples of the
Yeah.
westernization, all of those. But what's interesting is the film doesn't really mention the Second World War at all.
Mm-mm.
It discreetly touches on the complications and
Hmm.
difficulties that people faced. There's at one point there's a character that says Kyoto is so nice, it's so tranquil. There's nothing like this in Tokyo, which is full of dust.
Mm.
So, I mean, did you pick up on that? That to me is a
Yeah.
clear sign of,
Yeah.
dust from the war and rubble and so on. And American censors actually did pick up on that. They didn't like it, but they let it slide. And there's also another moment where we discover that Noriko hasn't married due to her poor health. And I think that's one of the only few times that the war is mentioned because it was a result of her working in the war. It's all kind of implied. Nothing's very in your face, right?
Hmm.
So, all of this to say, another major theme in Late Spring is people dealing with the Americanization and commercialization of this period and the tensions that came with the old and the new. What do you think?
That's a really, really great point, and it makes me think about the quote you said earlier about how Ozu can tell any story and every emotion without
Yes.
murder or without, because I think about other Japanese films that are kind of in response to the war, the post-war period, and I'm thinking Godzilla, where it needs a
Yes.
giant monster as this metaphor for, nuclear war and all of that, and then Akira Kurosawa made I Live in Fear, which is about the paranoia of nuclear weaponry. Kurosawa also made Rhapsody in August, which was made in the 90s, but it's about like the generation that lived through the war. And they're very, intense. And I think it's interesting how Ozu is able to still reflect these same themes, but he does it so subtly and so nuanced with this slice of life family film that still touches on the war, but not in this direct way. But you still feel this post war air about it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I love that you went back to that quote because you're right. Things always just linger under the surface and they're there if you really want to look for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, to wrap up Late Spring, I also want to mention some other key things. One, this is the first time in 14 years that Ozu worked with Kogo Noda again. It was also obviously the first time he worked with Setsuko Hara,
Mm-hmm.
and she would go on to appear in, I believe, six of his films.
Yeah.
I love her, don't you?
She's incredible.
She's so lovely. And you just look at her. She always has this big smile on her face. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know what she was like in real life, but I feel like that was her.
Yeah, I think so too.
Absolutely. And I was reading that Ozu and Hera were very close. And you actually mentioned this too, that her last film role was in 1962. And then I think when did he die? Did he die that same year,
He died in
1963? What did
63.
63? Yeah.
Yeah.
So she didn't work after that. That was her final role in 1962. And
Yeah.
as you said, she retired, but did you know that she retired in Kamakura, where Late Spring is set?
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, and the house that she lived in was actually close to Ozu's own grave.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so very close.
Yeah, for sure. If
It's
he
beautiful.
lived longer, she would have been in a lot more of his films, I think.
I think so too, for sure. And I mean, it just really touched my heart when I found out about that too, about her retiring, where she retired, living so close to,
Hmm.
his grave. And she radiates so much in his movies that I love to hear about just this connection that they shared.
Hmm.
But is there anything you want to add to Late Spring before we move on?
I don't think so. I think we
Yeah, we
got it
covered
all.
it. We've got it pretty good. Okay. So early summer, 1951. Yet again, we get a Noriko character. Oh, we should also mention that too, that the Noriko characters, they're not the same person. They're just all called
Yeah.
Noriko and they're all played by the same person. But
Yeah.
anyway, so we get another Noriko
Same
character.
actress, same
Yeah,
name.
same
Not
exactly.
confusing at all. Different
When
people.
whenever I had some people ask me online, like, "Oh, do I have to watch them in order? Why are they all called Noriko?" And whenever I try to explain it, they're kind of like, "What?" But anyway, so Noriko character yet again, pressured into marriage yet again, and this one, early summer, I would say, is more of a ensemble movie than Late
Hmm.
Spring was.
Yeah.
It has more of that extended family. And he would do that again in Tokyo Story 2. But so
Hmm.
Late Spring, I think there's around 19 characters, maybe 20 if you count one more person that's not shown.
Hmm.
I think I'm getting that right. But so 19, that's a lot. So, second entry in the trilogy introduces us to Noriko again. This time she's a secretary. She's 28, I believe, and she lives with her, as we said, extended family, which consists of her father, Shukichi, her mother, Shige. I also, if I'm mispronouncing this, I'm so sorry, but clearly I don't speak Japanese.
I'm glad you're covering the names because I.
Oh no. So her father, her mother, then we have the older brother, Koichi, who's interestingly, as we were saying, played by Shishiryu. He plays her
Yeah.
brother here. When he plays her father in Late Spring. But yeah, this was the point where I did a double take for the first time. I'm like, wait a
Hmm.
minute, that's her brother. But so we have her brother, Koichi. He's married to Fumiko. They have their two sons, Minoru, the older one, who's a bit spoiled. I was quite spoiled, I would say. And the younger one, Isamu, who is hilarious. He's
Yeah.
so adorable. I would put him honestly in my like pantheon of cute Ozu kids next to the guys in Good
Good
Morning.
morning.
Yeah,
Yes.
he's
Yes.
so cute. Adorable. The scene where, is this the one? Yeah, it is the scene where it opens with it, where he has to go wash his hands and he just wets the towel. And then Noriko asks him, like, well, did you wash your hands? And he's like, yeah, the towel's wet. Go check. I love that kid. I love that
That
kid.
feels like more work and planning than just washing your hands.
I know. It's ridiculous. So Isamu, yeah, adorable, hilarious. And so that's the family that lives together. And then they have their neighbors, their friends, their coworkers, and so on. And in terms of plot, it revolves around a visit from Noriko's elderly uncle who brings up that Noriko should get a husband. Crazy.
Classic
And
uncle stuff.
classic uncle stuff. I mean, the previous one, it was the aunt. So yeah, just shenanigans. So from there, her family starts really pushing her to find a suitable husband. Am I missing anything? I think
No,
that's
that.
no, that's it.
Hmm.
And so with this one, unlike Late Spring, where she firmly doesn't want a husband, I'd say she's more open to it in early summer.
Yeah.
And she comes up with her own choice for a husband that goes against the wishes of her family because they picked another one. And as we mentioned at the start, this is another example of Ozu showcasing this Western influence of women having the freedom to choose their own partners and just the general expectations of women at this time, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because they're pressuring her to get married, and then she finally does, and then they're like, "Oh, not like that, wrong person."
Yeah.
So it's like, can I ever please you? Like, but there are just so much expectations. But Noriko has her choices, and she just kind of she makes her decisions, and she's like, "You have to deal with it."
I love her in this one. She's so
Yeah.
strong in this one. I mean, in
Yeah.
all of them. But what I find so interesting as well is I'm still torn if this is my favorite or if it's Tokyo Story. But
Mhm.
what's interesting is that I would say this is the most comforting and funny out of the three.
Yes.
You know, the scenes with the young boys, as we said, the scene with, the adults hiding the cake from the kids. It
Yes.
contains the most humor.
Yes, for sure.
And at first glance, even with this brief breakdown, you would say that early summer and late spring are similar because the stories themselves, they both revolve around Noriko being pressured into marriage. The cast overlaps, the families both live in Kamakura actually,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth. But I think it's a deceiving film because even if it has the humor, the lightheartedness, the similarities, I would say that ironically, this one's a lot more sad than the previous entry. What do you think?
I agree with that. I think it's interesting that people think of them so similar, and I did too until I really like
Hmm.
started thinking
Same.
about it. But I like that they're considered this is considered a trilogy, even though they're not directly connected. Because I think thematically, if you can compare them, it brings out more than just the individual themes of each
Hmm.
one. Kind of like how in the first one she doesn't want to get married, in this one she does, and then who she chooses, and I think comparing all of those brings out more of these themes that connect the films.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, there are the similar themes, of course, of
Yeah.
the passage of time, of life moving on,
Hmm.
which is similar to Late Spring. But for me personally, the ending left me more empty.
Yes.
I would say with Late Spring, although it's melancholy, the end is still positive. Where with Early Summer, when Noriko fulfills her family's wishes, I mean, on her own terms, but
Yeah.
she still does, her decision rips apart the family. And
Yeah.
that hurts to see
It does.
because we also have Noriko's musings throughout as well, which I found sad too, where they talk about these very real realizations that as you age, your friendships change, and
Hmm.
as you get older, your circle of friends drifts apart. And I don't know about you, but for me, that really hit close to home.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It
At the
was,
end of the second one, I felt I just like sat there and I was like felt so many conflicting emotions because I'm like, she was able to make the choice, but it ripped the family apart. And is
yes.
this really what she wanted, or was it just because the mother asked? And how does she feel about her family being a little disappointed, and then the family's reconciling with that disappointment? And then the end, isn't it just like the floating, like the brush or whatever floating through?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm just sitting there watching it wave through, and I'm like, I'm feeling so many things, and I don't know how to feel or how to express it. So I'm just gonna sit
Yeah.
here and stare at these
Yeah.
the vegetation.
I'm happy that you actually brought up the ending. Do you know the Japanese title of Early Summer?
No, I don't.
So it's a barley harvest time. That's what it's translated to.
Okay.
And it speaks to, as you said, the final scene of the film where her
Yeah.
parents are, spoiler alert, I guess, but we've already spoiled it. But Noriko's parents are sitting at that family home, her uncle's family home, and looking at the barley fields. And we see, as you said, the bridal procession or a bridal
Yeah.
procession. And they, as you were saying, they all reflect on, their lives. There's just this bittersweet moment overall, and during this moment, Ozu does something important and also really rare in his work. He tracks the camera from left to right.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was almost like a suggestion of a continuation of life, just as this barley's also swaying in the wind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's just such a poetic moment that again speaks to that concept at the start that we said mono no aware.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I completely agree. I think that Mono no Aware, it's saying everything, there's beauty in everything. And I think that watching a Yasujiro Ozu movie, and it might not, there's so much going on underneath the surface, like we were saying. And so he can just have the camera looking at this barley, and out of context, you're just like, okay, that's a field of barley. But if you're watching the film and you have all this context, you feel so much just from watching this field, and you feel this like continuation of life, like you said. And I also think like it's blowing in the wind. It's like this ebbing and flowing of ups and downs of life changes, and kind of looking at this entire field, everything's going in and out, but it's still this entire field, like the looking at an entire life with all this
Mhm.
ups and downs and flowing, ebbing, and everything. But yeah, I think Ozu's just incredible at applying such subtext and such beauty and nuance to such simple things.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's perfectly put. I also love, I mean, as we said, he doesn't move the camera much, but when he does, it's gonna mean
Yeah,
something
exactly.
for sure. Is there anything you want to add to Early Summer before we move on to the final one?
No, I think we're good.
We're good. Cool.
Hmm.
So brings us to the final one. As we said, the most acclaimed one too, 1953's Tokyo Story. I should also remind as well that this is the first film, as we said, out of the three to be released after the occupation. And this is the one that Japanese critics really saw as his greatest achievement. Just this super profound look at aging, loss, love, and just human connections that are ultimately fleeting.
Hmm.
What does Tokyo Story mean to you?
what, what a question.
Loaded, I know.
That is Tokyo Story means so much to me because it, just like a lot of Ozu movies, it's very simple. It's just this, the grandparents coming to visit the rest of their family, and then just the familial relationships that happen. But it it always makes me think about my family. I know you saw my letterbox review. Every time I watch it, I'm like, I need to go call my mom. I need to go
Yes.
tell her that I love her. And it also, as like the younger generations in this are going through life, they're busy, they have their jobs. The doctor gets called in for his job. They have all these things going on, and the parents or grandparents, they have a more simple life now that they're older, and they're ready to, they're excited to see their children and grandchildren. But the parents are so busy with their work and modern life that they don't have that time to sit and just enjoy their time, before it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
But that
Yeah.
makes me think about my life. I'm working, I have goals and plans and things I want to do, but do I take a moment to, appreciate the small things and appreciate my familial connections and everything?
Oh, you're gonna make me cry with this. It's so true because I feel the same way. I feel like I get so wrapped up in my day-to-day life that
Hmm.
you just time flies, man.
It
Like
does.
it's all you can say is time flies. But so as we mentioned earlier, this is another ensemble film, and Noriko, I would say she's out of all of these three movies the least much so a central focus here than in
Yes.
the other two. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I for sure. She doesn't feel as much of the. You said it's an ensemble, but I still
Hmm.
feel like in the second one she's still like the main character. This one, I
Yeah.
don't feel like she's the main character. It's ensemble, but
Hmm.
I feel like the grandparents would be more considered the main characters of the third
Yeah,
one.
I would agree with that
Yeah.
statement. Yeah. And from what I understood, actually, I discovered this in my research. She was used in this movie again, not just because of her close relationship to Ozu, but to also bank on her star power at the time.
Really.
So, yeah. So, I mean, both reasons, of course, but that
Yeah.
was another reason why he brought her back on for this. So, what is it about? So the story focuses on the Hirayama family, and we first meet Shukichi and Tomi. Those are the elderly grandparents. Shishu is the father here, as we said, playing after playing Noriko's brother in the previous film. But so they're an elderly couple. They live in a port town, and we learn that they're traveling to Tokyo to visit their adult children. The children consist of Koichi, their son. He's a neighborhood doctor with his family of his own. Then they have their daughter, Shige, who has a hair salon on the first floor of her home, and her family. Side note, she bothered me so much throughout this. She's one
Yes.
of those characters you just want to shake and you're like, hello, like be
Yeah.
kinder to your parents.
Please.
Please, literally, please. So we have them, and those are two separate families. And Shukichi and Tomi's, wait, where am I going with this? Now I'm confusing myself. Yes, so they're the children of Shukichi and Tomi, yes. And then the grandparents also have their younger son, Keizo, who we see briefly. They also briefly stop to see him, but I don't think that interaction is shown. We don't see Keizo's house.
I don't think so.
No. But so that's the children. And so yeah, as we said, this trip that they make is heartbreaking. Their children don't make time for them. They continuously push them aside. They pitch in money to send them to a spa just to keep them busy.
Yeah.
And most importantly, they thrust Shukichi and Tomi onto Noriko, who is the widow of their son who died in the war.
Mhm.
And she's the one that spends the most time with them. She's the one that ensures that they have a lovely time. Anything you want to add to this? I just went all over the place there.
No, you summed it up really well. They
Oh,
come
thank
and
God.
on HBO Max, the little description was just like an elderly couple comes to visit their children and face rejection and hardship. And that was like the
Oof.
whole and that was such a simple way to put it. And it just not finding time. They sent them to the spa, and then they come back early, and then they're like,
Yes.
"Oh, we wanted you to stay away longer." I'm like,
Yeah.
they just want to see you.
So mean. I know. And it was Shige who says that
Yes,
too.
it
This is what I
is.
mean. It's always her. So, Tokyo Story is inspired by Leo McCarey's 1937 film Make Way for Tomorrow. Have you seen that?
Yes, I have. I cried over it.
I I have not. So maybe you can highlight the similarities of the two instead of me rattling on what I learned.
Yeah, so it's a very similar story. This elderly
Hmm.
couple, and they're just trying to find connection as they're aging. Their
Hmm.
family is the younger people are so busy. It's very similar to Tokyo Story. They're trying to connect, but they're so busy. And Orson Welles said that this Make Way for Tomorrow was a film that could make a stone cry. And I completely agree with Orson Welles
Wow.
there because it's just so powerful aging. It's not as much of an ensemble as Tokyo Story, I would say. It's
Hmm.
very much focused on the elderly couple, but yeah, it's very, very similar. I think you should watch it. You'd like it a lot.
Yeah, I definitely have to. Which one do you prefer?
I think I'm leaning Tokyo Story just because I think
Uh-huh.
Ozu's style lends it to it, lends it to these themes really well, but they're both really good.
Yeah, it's also worthwhile mentioning that Ozu wasn't the one who saw the film initially. It was Noda, his
Mm.
co-writer, and he saw it and he told Ozu of it. And so there's a film theorist, David Bordwell. He sees the film as Tokyo Story as Ozu recasting it from the American film
Hmm.
and borrowing from it versus adapting it. But again, you have a better idea of this than I do, of course. So
I could see it either way, an adaptation,
yeah.
a borrowing, whatever you want to call it. I don't know how
Hmm.
much Ozu has like mentioned it. The films
Yeah.
are very similar, but I could see it either way. I think everyone should watch both.
Yeah, yeah. It's gonna be going on my list to do for this
Yeah.
week. So good. And so, from what I read, Ozu's goal with Tokyo Story was to quote, depict how Japan's family system was breaking down by showing the change of parent-children relations. And according to Noda, what I found fascinating is Ozu actually wanted to complete a motif from early summer with Tokyo Story. Did you know
Mm.
about this?
No.
Yeah, I was like blown away by this. So Noda pointed out in the previous films, although every family member is concerned about what's going on with Noriko, about getting her to marry, they're doing so selfishly and they're only thinking of themselves. So while early summer and even late spring for that matter revolve around Noriko's marriage and her family wanting that for her, Tokyo Story pulls back and gives us a broader perspective of these familial relationships. So, with that said, I have another quote of Ozu and his goal. He said, quote, I would like to depict aversion inherent in blood relationships from the perspective of children, end quote. So, what he does is really clever because he takes a step back and shows things as they are, like
Hmm.
a way of life that's really common for all of us. And that's that, life goes on no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And the more selfish the Harayama children are, they get progressively more selfish as we see, but they never feel guilt or regret, I
Hmm.
don't think,
Hmm.
ultimately by their lack of availability to their parents. So I don't know about you, but I think that Ozu certainly did achieve completing the motif from the other two
Yeah.
films in the trilogy. What do you think?
I completely agree. It's interesting you bring up that you're not sure if the children feel guilt or regret. And I think it's hard for me to think if they did or not, because in those scenes where, you know, they would be contemplating guilt or regret. I'm just thinking like, have I called my mom recently? Have I did I have I spent enough time with her? So it makes me reflect on that. It's interesting, but I
Mhm.
think he definitely did complete that motif. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, of course. You know what I find funny too is Ozu said that neither he nor Noda wanted to make audiences cry while watching Tokyo Story. I know, I'm like,
What were we
what?
supposed to do?
Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous. He just wanted to present like a parent-child relationship for what it is. And I don't know about you, but like even just talking about it makes me want to cry. And
Yeah,
watching the movie, I always cry. What
I
about
do
you?
too. I did both
Yeah.
times I've seen it.
Yeah, totally. It's just so heartbreaking to see these kids fail
Hmm.
to see the point of their parents' visit because it's they're not on vacation to relax. They
Hmm.
just want to spend time with them, as you
Yeah.
said. And initially, I know I kind of talk smack about Shige and how she acts, but I don't really think that she's malicious. I think she's just thoughtless, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I agree. I don't think anyone's evil or actively mean like that. I think they're just caught up with their lives right now, and they're, like you said, thoughtless. That's a really great way to put it, that they're not being empathetic for how the grandparents are going to feel, and just trying to, caught up in her own life. Like you said, thoughtless is just a great way to put
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And during this recent rewatch, I actually had a bit of a eureka moment for myself, and it's in regards to the last scene. I found it to be really thoughtful. Do you know what I'm thinking of?
No.
So, Noriko is given Tomi's watch as a parting gift from Shukichi,
Mhm.
and he tells her, as he gives her the watch, that he wants her to remarry and be happy. Says that you're a good woman, this and that, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And Noriko is on the train heading home to Tokyo, and she takes the watch out of her purse and she holds it. And she has this calm look on her face. And that's when it kind of clicked for me. Even though the film proves that life goes on, even while it's filled with all these sadnesses that we endure, Shukichi gave Noriko what I think is the most beautiful gift, and he gave her the gift of time
Mm.
to accept the past and finally make time to carve out a new one.
I love that.
It's just my interpretation, though. I mean, what do you make of it?
I hadn't thought of that. I was just thinking, it's like a heirloom, but I really
Yeah.
like that. She's getting time, because I think time is such an obvious theme throughout this, and it's kind of like a too late type of film. Like, you need to love and spend time with your parents and your family before it's too late. And so giving her time, saying like it's not too late, that's really, really beautiful. I like that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just tearing up again.
I
I love it
know,
so
I
much.
know.
But yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about Tokyo Story, at least for today. Is there anything you want to add to the film?
Tokyo Story is just, what his biggest film. It's his most critically acclaimed. It's like third on the Sight and Sound list and everything, and it's
Mhm.
so resonant with everybody. It's very timeless, and it's very influential. And I've watched some more recent Japanese films, and I still see Yasujiro Ozu's influence on them. And the most obvious one for me was, I recently watched Perfect Days, Wim Wenders'
Mhm.
Perfect Days, and I
Yep.
saw a lot of Ozu in that. And I don't know if this was intentional, but the surname for Noriko's family in Tokyo Story is Hirayama, and that's the name of the main character in Perfect Days. I don't know if that's intentional, but I think it is.
It is.
I'm assuming it
So
is.
yes, oh my God, you just blew my mind. I'm like falling off my chair. So yes, so Ozu is a huge inspiration to Wim Wenders,
Hmm.
and Perfect Days is actually a tribute to Ozu, but I did not pick up on the name
Yeah,
on Hirayama. You just completely blew my mind.
yeah. So
Wow.
there's definitely influence there. Also, the director Hirokazu Koreeda, he has a lot of influence from Ozu, and he made this film in 2008 called Still Walking. Have you seen that one?
Not that one. Not
It
that one.
I wouldn't call it a remake of Tokyo Story, but it's very, very similar to Tokyo Story. It's like the family all getting back together, and then just like generational differences. And it's more of, the main character is the like middle generation, and like the disappointed grandfather, stuff like that. But
Hmm.
one, you have to watch it. It's incredible. One of the best films I've ever seen. But it reminded me
Wow.
so much of Ozu. You could see his style very much in Koreeda, with like the static camera and the frame within frame through the architecture. And then the camera moves 2 times and still walking the entire time. And it means so much. And it just reminded me of you bringing up that point where when Ozu moves the camera, he does a very few times. But when he does, it means something. So Ozu has still having a profound influence on cinema even today.
Oh, I love that. Okay, you've added a lot of things to my watch list this episode. I have my homework cut out for me, but I love it. No, Koreeda's great. I do love Koreeda's movies. That one I haven't seen, so
Mhm.
definitely going to check it out. I'm also curious, in terms of going back to the Noriko trilogy, how would you rank them? I personally don't like ranking things,
I
but
know,
I'll
and
put
it's so
you on the
hard.
spot.
Okay. I'm gonna put Tokyo Story. I'm gonna be basic and say Tokyo Story is the best. It's basic, but like, come on.
Yeah,
And
there's a
then I
reason.
think I like the first one a little bit more than the second one,
Interesting.
but they're all so close. But yeah, I think I would go with that ranking. 3-1-2.
Interesting. Yeah. For me, I don't know. I after these rewatches, I'm kind of tied on Early Summer and Tokyo Story. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know why Early Summer, it just really clicked with me.
No, that's valid.
So, but again, as you said, I love them all so much that
Yeah,
any sort of ranking is like minimal.
yeah. I'm gonna
So,
rewatch them, and then my ranking's gonna be completely flipped or
of
something.
course, it also depends on your mood too,
For
because like we
sure.
said, I mean, all these movies really do touch you emotionally. So it just depends what mood you're in.
Yeah, and one thing I like about Ozu, and specifically with the Noriko trilogy, I know you said it in your Letterbox review that you're going to watch Tokyo Story every 10 years. And I had the
Yes.
exact same idea because I feel like I'm 24 right now, so I have a certain perspective on generational differences in life. But if I watch this when I'm 60, I'm going to have a different perspective. And that's another reason why I think they're so timeless is that as you age, you're going to look at them differently or maybe connect with different characters, because when I watch Tokyo Story now, I'm connecting with the younger generation, like I need to go call my mom. But maybe when I'm older, I'll connect with the old ones and like, I'm going to go visit and annoy my children.
Annoy my children. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I guess as I mentioned at the start too, my major takeaway for this episode was to just highlight the beauty of Ozu's work and these sublime stories that, I
Mm,
don't know, for me, they just remind me to be a better person.
yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, I think we did a good job. How do you feel about this?
I feel good.
Yeah, anything you want to say to wrap up the chat on Ozu?
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure. Very much so appreciate it. Can you tell the fine folks where they can find you online or anything you want to shout out?
I'm Sinjun Watches Movies on TikTok and on Letterboxd, and then I also have a YouTube channel. There's a Parasite video coming soon, and that one is
Ooh.
just Sinjun Chapman.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming on McFly's Movie House, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.